it should be all right, huh? I see my own presentation now.
Okay, we can also see yours, so I think we're good to go.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So sorry for the small hiccup. So I'm just speeding up. I jumped back into the share of renewables in power supply on a global level. That's right now 26%. So we are actually quite good on a trajectory, as the previous speaker already said. And the global trends in the power sector is that the new power generation capacity mainly added is solar and wind, and I'm elaborate a bit more on that. So we will have very high shares of variable power generation, and that means we can't actually have a lot of so-called base load power plants. It's actually a base generation power plant, not a base load, because base load will be there, but not base generation. We have more and more, and that's what the solar industry is talking about quite often. We have a digitalization of electricity, so we have decentralized generation and storage, and we have more and more consumer who turn into prosumer, so they actually also generate parts of their electricity. And we have more and more sector coupling, which basically means that we have an increased electrification in transport and heating. So jumping now into the global trends, and I'm going to show the levelized cost of electricity, LCOE. This is an analysis which is published by a consulting firm called Lazar in the US, and they become sort of the go-to for those LCOEs. They publish every November, actually, their new analysis, and it's a global and then US research about what the levelized cost of electricity, so how much does new electricity generation actually cost, and existing power plants. And you see that in the nuclear electricity has a rather wide spread. So from the lower end, which is about $100 per megawatt hours, or which basically is 10 cents per kilowatt hour, up to about 190. The average is around 150, and that is utility scale technologies and new generation, not existing. And you see that solar and wind is significantly lower. It's actually factor 3 lower than new nuclear. Going to the comparison between new build unsubsidized utility scale onshore wind and solar PV. So that means this is the cost, the marginal, the levelized cost of electricity for brand new projects. And you compare that with the marginal cost of existing conventional generation. So basically, that means those power plants do exist, and that's what they generate electricity for. And the interesting thing is that in some cases, not in all cases, but in some cases, new solar and onshore wind, utility scale solar, not on the rooftop, but like large scale utility scale solar, in areas with a good sunshine regime, obviously, or with good wind regimes, can actually produce electricity for the same costs as existing coal and nuclear power plants, which basically means that there were quite a few projects or existing coal power plants which have been switched off in the US, simply because new build was cheaper than operating the existing coal power plants. And that is true and can be true for nuclear as well. Here's the cost curve or the cost overview about levelized cost of electricity between 2009 and 2019. So solar was almost 3 times more expensive 10 years ago than nuclear. We compare here new build with new build. Now, new build nuclear is about almost 4 times more expensive than solar. And that means that, and that explains why the capacity additions, and I'm coming to that in a minute, are all in the field of solar and wind, is simply the cheapest form of electricity. Which I don't have the slide here, but there is, you can also have that from Lazar, the costs of storage. The cost of storage actually describes the same curve as solar PV, so rapidly downwards over the last few years and within the next 5 to 7 years. So in 5 to 10 years, base load, so sort of 24/7 solar and wind power generation will be cheaper than new build gas and new build coal, definitely. Nuclear is by far the most expensive form of power generation we have currently on the power market. So that's definitely, it's already cheaper. If we go into the global trends in terms of installed capacity, we have the situation that over in 2019 alone, there were about 115,000 megawatts new build solar photovoltaics and about 60,000 megawatts new build wind. If we add all the new solar, wind and hydropower and biomass together, so then we have more than 200,000 megawatts in only 12 months additional capacity. We compare that to the global nuclear fleet of less than 400 gigawatts. And we, again, we look into what's happening right now in the market in 2020. In terms of capacity, the solar and wind industry basically installed within 2 to maximum 3 years the same capacity on a global level than all existing global nuclear power plants. And this is simply because it's cheaper. It's not nothing else. There is nothing else. There is no other reason, just cheaper. And if we look at the effect and compare that with the existing and startups and closure from nuclear worldwide, and that's a new study which just has been published from WISE, which is a very good information consulting firm and organization publishing statistics of nuclear energy worldwide, very detailed. I would recommend, it's a must read basically of that publication. I'm using that quite often, and you see that more power plants close, shut down worldwide than open up. Even if you check the only country who actually really adds capacity or had added some capacity nuclear is China, which even that will not replace the shutdowns over the past few years. And China also, I have to say, is in charge of more than about half of all new built solar and wind. So about 50% of the global wind market and 50% of the global solar market is actually installed in China. So China installs more solar and wind than nuclear over the last few years. So we have, that's, I already said that, the capacity additions, solar and wind in 2019, and nuclear cannot even replace the closures with new capacities. So that's why we are heading into a trajectory that nuclear is moving into irrelevance on a global level in terms of electricity supply and the electricity shares, so they will go down rapidly. The picture is, and here are a few other sort of statistics. You see that, that the global capacity for including hydropower is 2,500 gigawatts of renewable capacity. Nuclear has about 400, so renewables are significantly stronger, have a significantly higher share on a global level. And if you look at the new build power plants worldwide. I think it looks on my screen a bit blurry, but on the actual PowerPoint, it's quite clear. So 70% of all new built power plants worldwide are renewables, mainly wind and solar. So only 25% of all new built power plants last year on a global level, including China, including India, including the US, including Europe, everywhere, are renewable, and only 25% are fossil. Moving to the 100% renewable concept we published last year, and we are actually working on a number of different scenarios now for specific countries. We have published Bangladesh and Vietnam, Costa Rica. We are working right now on Switzerland and the Czech Republic. We published Italy. So we have a whole variety of different countries where we do an assessment of the power of the total energy system, and how energy, including electricity, obviously, will change and will evolve in order to meet the Paris Climate Agreement. So if we look at the numbers, we see that in 2020 and towards 2025, we are actually, in terms of the electricity generation and new renewable capacity, we are actually on the trajectory on the same trajectory as we suggested for a 1.5 degree scenario. We are on the right track because of the wrong reason, I have to say, because partly we are on the right trajectory because COVID-19 actually had a huge impact on the electricity demand, on the overall energy demand, and it will probably bounce back in 2021. So we're not on the 1.5 degree trajectory anymore, but currently we are. And I have to ask Katja if I should go a bit further into the scenario, or if we should just break here to have some questions and then I jump into the scenario.
Well, perhaps, I mean, we still have plenty of time. Also looking, I think we have still 25 minutes that was slotted for your entire presentation. So you can go ahead, and we're just, and people will have more time to pose questions. We have a few coming in, and yeah, so you can continue and then we'll...
Okay, I continue then. So what we did is we developed a 100% renewable energy scenario. The project scope is we need to decarbonize the entire global energy sector within one generation, so until 2050. And we only take technologies into account which are currently available or under development, excluding biomass, carbon capture and storage. I will talk a bit more about why. And nuclear energy, that was because of a variety of different reasons. One is obviously the costs. Secondly, it has a system problem because nuclear needs to operate rather stable 24/7 in order to be economic, and a system with high variable electricity supply like solar and wind. And I just wanted to make sure that and to underscore that wind and solar is not intermittent. Wind is very good. The forecast for wind is very good. Same for solar. Neither sunrise nor sunset comes as a surprise, so therefore it is not intermittent. Nuclear is intermittent because if you have an emergency shutdown, you actually lose a gigawatt or 2 gigawatts of capacity, generation capacity, within seconds. That does not happen for solar or wind because it's more dispersed, it's just more distributed. I read quite often intermittent renewables just to make sure renewables are not intermittent. What we did is we worked on a 10 world regional scenario. based on the World Energy Outlook. The World Energy Outlook is published today in London. I actually did an analysis of the World Energy Outlooks since 1978, and this new report is launched today. So if you want to have a look about the World Energy Outlooks of the last like 20 years, overview what they said, you can download that. And interesting enough is that the IEA, as you heard in the previous speaker, actually has the first time a 1.5 degree scenario, or sort of almost 1.5 degree. Unfortunately, they actually don't, as far as I have seen, do not actually show the 2050 figures, but I haven't seen the World Energy Outlook yet. We did a power sector analysis, so we did the modeling on an hourly resolution. We calculated storage demand and increased interconnection between the regions. So that is the model we used. So we have a transport model. So we developed transport scenarios for 10 regions worldwide. We did a GIS-based renewable energy potential analysis, which basically means we took the entire world and mapped but subtracted from the map all the nature conservation areas, the areas where sort of there's already cities, there are road and rail, and all the different uses, including agriculture use, and just check what's left in terms of space, and then check how much wind and solar we could install there. So we actually have a very good overview about in terms of space requirements. Then we modeled, and that was in joint work with the German Aerospace Center. We did an energy system modeling based on population and GDP projections until 2050. And then we took the electricity part out of that and modeled and have broken down the 10 regions into 7 sub-regions for each 7 to 8 sub-regions for all of those 10. So we have altogether, we had 72 regions, and those 72 regions, we calculated a load profile for each of that based on the current load profile. And then we took the meteorological data in terms of solar and wind and simulated in 1 hour resolution demand and supply. So does that match actually, and how much capacity, storage capacity we need, and so on. And this is not sort of, maybe it's not interesting for this presentation. We also had a non-energy greenhouse gas emission scenario, which includes all the other greenhouse gases, but I'm not elaborating on that in this presentation. So the renewable resource assessment, the spatial assessment is shown on this slide. So we actually did, we subtracted quite a number of different uses, like residential and urban settlements, infrastructure, industrial areas, intensive agricultural production land, nature conservation areas, wetlands, and closed grasslands. So what we found is that, hang on, that what we found is that we have more than enough potential for solar and wind, and that's basically just a result for Africa. I should have pulled out the European one. Here are the results. So you see, yeah, I should have pulled out the European one, but basically we calculated the square kilometers for solar, for utility scale solar. It's not rooftop, it's just utility scale solar, and onshore wind in terms of square kilometers, and then calculated how many gigawatts we can actually put on that area. And that's basically more than enough. So on the global level, we never used more than 5, maximum 10% of the restricted space potential for renewables in order to actually implement the scenario we have developed. In terms of the global results, we have the energy intensity per GDP, so energy unit per GDP went down, which basically means that we have the same economic development as the reference case, but because of more efficiency, we need less energy per dollar GDP. In terms of the overall global energy demand, we have a lot of efficiency in the white bars here. I don't know if you see my cursor here, but so the white bars here are the efficiency. It's the efficiency. And you see that it's quite extreme in the transport sector, but also to somehow in the residential area. And the reason for that is we have quite a lot of electrification. So for example, a combustion engine loses about 60% or 50%, depending on the efficiency, of energy content in the gasoline to heat. While electricity the electricity drive has an efficiency of about 90% and more. So electric drives are very efficient. However, we need to parallel the increase of electric mobility with the increase of renewable electricity generation, because if we would not do this, we would supply electric vehicles maybe with coal power plants, and then the vehicles would be even have a higher CO2 emission per kilometer than for an internal combustion engine. So you need to sort of align those strategies. This is the final electricity sector and final electricity demand by sector, also on a global level. And that looks the same for Europe, or it would look the same for a country. As a rule of thumb, and it's very important, if you electrify the transport sector, you actually need to, or you will almost double the electricity demand of a country. So you will decrease the demand of fuels, but increase significantly electricity, which means if electric mobility gets implemented, you need to have more power generation based on renewables in order to make it economic, in order to make it environmentally sound and sort of at one concept, which brings me to sector coupling. What we will have is that the transport sector and the power sector, they don't really have much to do with each other right now. Usually public transport operates with electricity, so trains and light rails. In some countries there are overhead electric buses, but quite rarely. So usually some forms of public transport is already electricity. But on the global level, on average, in each region, electricity is about 1 to 2% of the overall transport demand. The rest are fuels. That will change. And that means that the electricity sector and the transport sector will have a bigger connection, more and more increased connection, more and more electricity will be used and sort of shifted over to the transport sector. And that means that the transport sector needs more storage, because the car will not drive with a cable. So each car has a battery on board. A mass production of batteries will decrease the price of batteries, and at the same time will increase the amount of storage available. That means we have more and more solar and wind, which is variable. And at some point in time, we need storage, but this is accessible from the transport sector. And that brings me to the role of nuclear. The problem we have is, if you have a power plant which needs to operate 24/7 in order to be economically viable, it is very difficult to integrate a system which is rather flexible. You have solar generation goes up and down, obviously, quite significantly over the day, because after sunset you have no solar electricity, obviously, but this is not a surprise, that's clear. Wind comes over the day and the seasonal differences. So you will have to manage a system like that much different. It's not a problem. It's doable, but it is different, and that means in such a flexible system, to have an inflexible power plant is a problem, and will not be really helpful for the overall sector. So that's was one reason why we also did not increase the share of nuclear in this scenario. I have shown this slide again before, and you see that in 2050 we have ocean energy. We always have a little bit of ocean energy in the scenarios, just to show the people from the ocean energy industry, we see you, we like you, but we don't really rely on them, to be honest. Then we have concentrated solar power. This is a technology which only works in deserts. So here in Australia, it would work perfectly. We only have one power plant here, unfortunately. Geothermal, depending on the regions. Biomass is available here, but we actually use biomass more for the hard to decarbonize sectors, for thermal energy, for example, steel and cement, but also aviation. Then we have a very large part of solar photovoltaics and on wind. And therefore you see that the entire system is rather variable. Plus we have a lot demand side management options with charging and discharging strategies of batteries from the transport sector, and thermal storage, because we have more and more electric heating systems as well, mainly on the basis of heat pumps. And they have quite often, or usually, thermal storage, which can also be used for demand side management. And that's the last slide I think I want to show, because otherwise I think the heating part and the other parts are not really the topic of this conference here. So I stop with electricity. The generation costs, we have we calculated it, and we have the average generation cost. So that's the entire mix. In the first like 10 years, in general, the electricity on a global level generation costs go up, no matter what scenario, and that's due to the fact that the industrialized countries, the power plants are usually old and need to be replaced, and that means the new investments decisions are around the corner anyway. In developing countries have to add new power plants as well, because they're just starting to establish their power sector, and renewables are quite handy for them because they are relatively cheap and very quick to build. Then we see that around 2030, the scenario actually makes economic sense for on the renewables side, because you have more renewables. That means we have less and less fuels. And as I said, as I showed in my first slides, we are almost at fuel parity with solar and wind in some regions. So that means if we replace fuels, we actually don't have any fuel costs anymore, and that pays off in the long run. And another additional advantage of this is that if electricity gets sort of the maintenance and the service is usually done by local people, because you can't actually fly in engineers or technicians from other countries. So if you spend your money on the operation and maintenance, the money remains in the country. While if you spend the money on fuel, and quite often countries do not have their own fuel supply, the money leaves the country. And that means the money leaves the economy of that country. So even if you would pay the same amount per kilowatt hour for the electricity, you would actually have a better economic output for renewables, because the money remains in the country and is helpful for the country's economy. And I think with that, I'm gonna close, and we have some time for questions.